Hello, and welcome to One-on-One with Robert Doar. I'm your host, Robert Doar, and thanks for tuning in today. As president of the American Enterprise Institute, I have the unique privilege of working with America's greatest policy experts. These scholars focus on policy issues in the fields of education, economics, energy, foreign and defense, and so much more. Subscribe to this podcast for exclusive access to in-depth discussions on the most pressing policy issues. Together with my guests, we'll challenge political preconceptions, explore innovative ideas, and create, I hope, a freer and safer world. All right, today we have the wonderful, terrific Chris Stirewalt, television superstar, but also AEI scholar. And I don't know, listeners, if you've noticed, but Chris is producing the most interesting analysis of the political scene and the campaign anywhere, I think. And
I love it when you lie to me.
It's true.
When your boss's boss lies to you, that's when you really
wrote a
like
piece,
it.
9 Weeks to Fight for the Late Deciders, which took us through every state and why Pennsylvania is important and how they all fit together in the both presidential candidates' strategies. That was just outstanding. And so, Chris, you're doing it all.
Well, I should say, since we are here and at the AEI studio, this is an example of a piece that, without the help of my great research assistant, Nate Moore, wouldn't have been nearly as easy for me to do. Because
that's what all scholars, we all depend on our research assistants, but only a few of us admit it.
To keep it simple, you have to first understand the complexity, right? What's the Picasso corny line? Before I could paint like a child, I had to learn how to paint like the masters. We have so much conversation right now in the election. Whose forecast model is the best model? Well, Nate Silver says this, and the 538 says that, and this says that, and this says that. All interesting, all whatever. National polls catch most of that stuff, right? And if you take an average of high-quality national polls, you get a pretty good sense of where the electorate stands. And if you want to know where the Electoral College stands, subtract 2 points from the Democrats, and there you are. So Democrat Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote by 2.02 points in 2016.
And it wasn't enough.
So if you're a Democrat, anything that's like 2 points in a national lead is still too small. And it's just because of the way that the states are oriented. It's about a 1.6, 1.7 point on average swing state shift to the right compared to the nation as a whole. There's a lot of voters in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago that are wasted votes in federal elections. This is how you account for that. And then when you look at it, you get a pretty good sense of where the race is.
And that's what I want to ask you. We are talking in the I guess the second day after the debate. This will come out probably in a couple of days after this. So this is a great opportunity for us to test you because the post-debate polls aren't out yet. I don't think there's been anyone of any significance, and you'd have to collect a few. But what is your view? What of your view will be the state of the race after the country digests what happened in that debate?
It is very hard for someone who is listening to this podcast to imagine that the 6% of the electorate that will decide the election are in between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Because if you're listening to this podcast, you're thinking about these things. You think about policy. You know everything about everybody. You can tell, if you're listening to this podcast, you can say, well, here's what Kamala Harris did as a DA in San Francisco, and then she ran for attorney general.
Oh, you're saying that our podcast listeners are a notch up in terms of too
erudite.
They're too knowledgeable. They read too much. And so really they're not who we're talking about.
Right. And it's hard for someone who's within the sound of our voices right now to understand, but 6-7% of the electorate decides, because those are the people who are the unicorns in our system. They are high propensity voters with low partisan salience. So
you're dodging the question. You're saying I can't imagine what they're thinking.
No.
Well, come on. Imagine. This is your job.
No, I can. So in that 6 points, Trump needs to win 2/3 or something like that, because national popular gap being what it is. He could ill afford what he did. And a lot was done to him, or maybe better to say, Harris got off extraordinarily easily. It wasn't that the questions for Trump were unfair. It's that the questions for Harris were too easy, right? If they would have gone as tough or nearly as tough with Harris as they had with Trump.
But she didn't. I mean, I have to just say one thing about that. That is the standard right-wing talking point, and I see
That's
it a
me.
little bit. But I will say I don't think she was as egregious on the truth. She was sort of your typical politician.
So what's the
lying?
what's
Where
the
he's
correct
another
ratio?
dimension.
What's the correct ratio on fact checking in that circumstance? I've been part of producing, I don't know, a dozen debates in my career. What is it, 5-2? You should fact check him. Should have fact checked him 5 to her 2, but it definitely isn't 5-0.
Okay, yeah, that's
right?
fair. Absolutely, and that's what happened.
So out of a sense of journalistic probity and also market interest, it would have behooved them to, when she ducked one question, to say, "I hear you, but what we're asking you is about X." Just brush her back a couple times to make it clear.
Okay, but still,
that having been said.
All of this has been said and is being said. What do you think will be the state? Will be on the eve of the debate, Chris?
Yes.
The Times came out with a report, national poll,
Right.
that disappointed the Democrats
Yes.
and it made the Republicans hilariously happy because. There wasn't that big of a bump. She wasn't doing as well as she said she was.
Well, and Trump had actually the story of the period of time since Biden left. So Biden leaves in July, and the story of July to September was Democratic enthusiasm surges, and a bunch of Democrats who were sitting on the sidelines, some who said they were going to vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., some who said they might not vote, came back, and they came back, bang, right away. And her number, she got back all of those voters. Were those voters actually going to vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Were they actually going to stay home, or were they trying to send Joe Biden a message? Were they trying to say, until you leave this race, I'm not going to vote. You're too old. And she gets all of that back. And do you remember Cash for Clunkers?
Yes, I remember the Cash for Clunkers, yes.
So Cash for Clunkers was designed to stimulate the automotive industry in the recession after the panic of 2008. And they did succeed in selling a bunch of cars, but they didn't sell any more cars than they were going to sell. They just moved up the purchases.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris got her convention bounce. She just got it early. The Democrats all came home and everybody felt good and she got her number. Then they had their convention and she executed it well. She was successful, but there weren't any more Democrats on the sidelines to come in, because that's what you get from your convention. What you get from your convention is the home team gets together and says, we said a lot in the primaries and we fought and we've disagreed before, but I feel good now and we're going to go beat the other guys. And the Democrats already got that in the
run up to the debate.
Now
we're at the debate.
So then, in the period of time between the Democratic convention and the debate, there is a counter response from the Republican electorate of Republicans who could maybe live with Biden or weren't threatened by Biden or weren't anxious about Biden. And now they see Kamala Harris, and based on what the coverage is saying and based on everything else, she's going to win. She's going to storm in, and she's going to do it. And so the Republicans got the antibody response inside the Republican Party brought that. And again, what everybody has to remember, this is a Yuval Levin point that I steal frequently, which is one of the primary defects of our current political environment is the elections are too close, right? We're talking about, people rightly say Donald Trump has a high ceiling and a low floor, or he has a low ceiling and a high floor. Relatively speaking, so does Kamala Harris, right? What's the lowest vote share that a Democrat could possibly get in the United States? 45, right? What's the bottom? What would Joe Biden have gotten? 45%?
We would have thought it was a landslide, but
not any lower than that. Since we don't have landslides anymore because we're so well sorted, you get a point, and a point is a lot, right?
Right.
In a universe where you're only fighting over 10 points, A tenth of that is quite a lot. So you have you have an antibody response among Republicans to Harris, and so they come in. And Donald Trump had been really helped by one thing. There was one story about Donald Trump from the time that Joe Biden started being pushed out of office until the Democratic convention was over, which was the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. That was the one big Trump story. There were no other big Trump stories. We were not talking about Donald Trump except for the fact that he miraculously did not meet that end. And it was a huge story. But that was the only big Trump story. And guess what? When it came time for the debate, Donald Trump should have said, and we want to keep the focus on Kamala Harris. We're going to keep the focus on Kamala Harris. And he couldn't do it. So that's a very long way of saying I expect to see Kamala Harris up more than 5 points.
Whoa, that's a big jump.
I would think in average we'll need
that's because the pundits all said that she won decisively. Trump blew it. Trump took the bait. All that stuff. But if you read between the lines on the discussions with the undecided voters in these panel discussions, that wasn't so emphatic pro-Kamala as that I saw.
It's not that it's pro-Kamala. It's that it's anti-Trump.
Okay.
So the thing about these persuadable, so think about the electorate this way. You've got 6% that are undecided. A bunch of them won't vote. But you've got this share of the electorate that's genuinely undecided. Then you click it out one more band and you say there's 10 or 12% of the electorate that's persuadable. Now, they may not be persuadable between Harris and Trump, but they're persuadable between Trump and writing in Barry Goldwater or Harris and leaving the presidential line blank, that they have a wider range of potential answers. Mm-hmm. In an election where you're going to have states that are probably, again, decided by 10 or 15 or 20,000 votes, that's not for nothing. So these voters are, we know the difference between a choice election and a referendum election. And in the Biden-Trump election, Republicans wanted it to be a referendum
on Biden,
on Joe Biden. Now, Kamala Harris wants it to be a referendum, too. She wants it to be a referendum on Donald Trump. If you listen to her convention speech, you wouldn't even have known that she was the sitting vice president of the United States. Mm-hmm. What was her language? We've got to turn the page, turn the page.
Can't go back.
We can't go back. We turn the page. So she is trying to make it a referendum on Donald Trump's term in office and Donald Trump. Now, that's risky because Americans overwhelmingly, not overwhelmingly,
well, they
but
like
decidedly.
The term. They didn't like they're a little disgruntled
the
about
dismount.
him.
Yeah, the dismount was problematic.
Yeah.
But she is trying to keep Donald Trump.
Okay, so you accept that the polls will be better for her when this podcast comes out. That's your thesis. 5% is
give me a week. I'm saying
week to be given.
No, I'm saying a week from today. We're recording this on Friday.
Yes.
By next Friday, I expect that in the average of national polls, her advantage should be close, 5 points or so.
Okay. Now, we've talked about that debate. I do want to say in your column, you wrote a couple sentences about the vice president that were sort of consistent with typical right of center talking points.
Jeez.
You should say he could do what he could do is stay sharp. You're talking about President Trump, and try to exploit whatever inevitable stumbles Harris will make. Then a sentence later, you said Trump could benefit from a bad outing by an opponent, quote, famously bad at speaking extemporaneously.
Yes.
So that was the expectations. We all went into this work. According to Donald Trump and you, the vice president of the United States could not utter a sentence, clearly. And then we went to the debate, and I just want to say, did she surprise you?
I want the next time I'm being attacked on social media as a Trump hater, I'm gonna cite you as a character witness.
Clearly, you were even-handed there. Pretty strong on the vice president.
So Kamala Harris is famously bad at extemporaneous speaking, and she tends to talk like a Marin County sort of wine mom vibe.
Wine mom. I've heard that term before.
A very vibe
wine
energy.
Mom. That could go either way.
We have
good
been
wine mom or
yeah,
bad wine
exactly.
mom.
And in Marin County, it's good wine.
Yes, that's right.
But it's we are unburdened by what has been and
all that stuff.
This sort of.
But during the debate.
So here's the difference. Donald Trump, we have seen Donald Trump in more than a dozen presidential debates in the past decade. And neither you nor I could have reliably said which Donald Trump was going to show up on stage in Philadelphia. Is it going to be the Donald Trump who debated Joe Biden and let Joe Biden hang himself and force himself out of the race? Maybe. Is it going to be Donald Trump, the scenery chewer? And it was Donald Trump, the scenery chewer. And it was sort of even odds. The people, there's a Kremlinology, a Mar-a-Lago-ology that goes on about how do we interpret what Trump's mood is and who he's traveling with. He's with Laura Loomer and Tulsi Gabbard. So does this mean this and this means that? And the political press spends a lot of time trying to discern what Donald Trump's state of mind is at any given point. I cannot say enough good about H.R. McMaster's new book about his time in the Trump administration. And one of the things that he identifies is all of the time and effort that went into cosseting Trump and trying to predict what his moods would be and how it would be, and how when he got behind closed doors with Xi Jinping or with Vladimir Putin or whomever, that Trump was so easily manipulated. And McMaster's frustration was, we're trying to brief you. Mike Pompeo, H.R. McMaster, Mike Pence, the whole Nikki Haley, the Legion of Worthies are there trying to help. And Trump doesn't want to prepare and he doesn't want to do it. And then he gets spun around and tripped up by these folks. And that's exactly what Kamala Harris did to him. I wrote that she had 3 tasks to try to accomplish in Philadelphia. Task number 1, seem plausible. That's the one.
Seem plausible.
That's the one that you know very well, which is when it comes to people running for president, you walk out on stage and either it's there or it's not there. Barack Obama, by biography in 2008, was not ready to be president of the United States. But when he walked out on that first debate stage with Hillary Clinton, people said,
okay,
I can see it.
The vice president walks out on the stage, marches across the stage,
nailed it.
Says Kamala Harris, shakes his hand,
nails it. Plausible.
Check one.
Check one. Her other task was to get Donald Trump annoyed. And boy, did she succeed.
So she did
at
that.
Number 2, she nailed that. Number 3 was to tell a compelling story about how and why her views changed. And she did not do that. Okay. And the thing that she left open is she did not, human beings only really learn through stories. We don't absorb data. We really learn from stories. And Kamala Harris needed a story to tell to voters in Pennsylvania, both liberal and conservative, both moderates and progressives, to say to them, here's why I feel differently about this issue than I did before.
Okay, so I think that they totally missed the opportunity to challenge her on policy and to make her really fess up to her progressive views, which I don't think are good for the country. But I will tell you that in one sentence, she told a story.
Which was?
Tim Walz and I are gun owners.
Yeah.
She said that I'm not going to take people's guns away. I'm a gun owner.
Yeah.
I think that hit people.
That was a good one.
That was a surprise one. I also, right after the debate, J.D. Vance went on TV and said, well, it's all a bunch of platitudes. But some of the platitudes are things that our friend Yuval Levin and others say about respecting our institutions, standing up for ourselves as a country, aspiring to a greater America, not tearing people down all the time. And I didn't think all the platitudes were so bad.
If a problem that Republicans continue to run into is, she was platitudinous. Yeah, she's flip-flopped. She's a politician. That's what politicians do. They're platitudinous and they flip-flop. The Republican, J.D. Vance is making an argument that if Nikki Haley were the Republican nominee or Tim Scott or Marco Rubio, there's a list of Republican nominees that you can say, you're flip-flopping, you're inconsistent, you don't care about policy, these are just platitudes. But you can't say it with Donald Trump. Basically, I observed politics is about two parties that are seeking competitive advantage against each other. And when they see that somebody else has something that works, they steal it, right? Bill Clinton very famously, right? They made it explicit. We're going to triangulate. There's a third way that we can do this. We're not going to let these people continue to take these issues away from us. So we will talk about welfare reform. We will talk about Sister Soldier. We will do these things. We're not going to we're going to take the good stuff that we want from them. In tactical comparative advantage, Donald Trump has had the advantage that he can say anything that he wants to say, and the Republicans will basically 89, 92% of Republicans will say, it's fine, whatever. I don't care what he says about abortion. I know that he'll be okay. He gets extraordinary latitude, the kind of latitude that Mitt Romney would never in a million years have gotten from Republicans.
Okay.
If he would have been as flip-floppy as Trump is on a host of issues, they would have excoriated him. With Trump, it's somehow he has surpassed disbelief. He's in a space beyond disbelief with Republicans, and they're okay with it. Harris and the Democrats are trying something similar, which is to say, look, we're not going to, and I by the way, I think it's wholly good, because a Democratic Party that is beholden to extraordinarily radical, weird people in their base.
Mm-hmm. We talk about that all the time.
Is not a party that can govern. And the Democratic Party that we saw in the early days of Joe Biden's presidency was not a party that was making a play to be a national party. They were cosseting and sucking up to these narrow interest groups within their party.
So you're saying she's trying she's trying to be the Bill Clinton Democrat.
She's daring Democrats. And by the way, that New York Times poll, if I was Kamala Harris, I would have been very pleased to see that New York Times poll that showed me down 1 point nationally.
Really?
Here's why. The party that will win is the party that runs like it is losing. And the moment of danger for the Democrats
absolutely is when they get arrogant.
Is
like
the moment where Harris is up 8 or 9 points, and Democrats say, now let's talk about your border policies. It's time to talk about fracking. It's time to talk about this, that, and the other thing, because they will be trying to position themselves for her inevitable administration, and that's when the fractures appear. As long as they're terrified of Donald Trump and running scared, they can win.
Okay, so now you've mentioned these Republicans that stay loyal to Donald Trump, and we know many of them, and we understand why that is the case. But there seems to be a little crack this week in that President Trump has done some things that are particularly beyond the pale. There are things going on that appear beyond the pale. This Laura Loomer thing is completely weird to me.
I love that it speaks very well of you that you do not know who that is.
And I also am not a great fan of Tucker going on the road with Vice President candidate Vance and the sons after hosting a Holocaust denier on his show. Is there any sign that maybe and then of course Vice President Cheney endorsed Harris, Liz Cheney endorsed Harris. I know that nobody thinks they're relevant anymore, but they are prominent Republicans. Mm-hmm. Is there any sign that a significant enough to have a impact on the election of Republicans, even conservative Republicans, are not going to vote for Trump and might vote for Harris just to stop him because of these things?
Well, we know it's true. The question is, will it be enough?
Yeah.
So we look at you can arrange the states this way. The states that, if Harris wins just one of North Carolina, Georgia, or Arizona, she's on her way to a pretty good thumping of Donald Trump. If Trump wins,
just one of them,
because what it means is it's like filling up a bucket. The states have a polity unto themselves and relative to each other. If she's won Georgia, she's also won all of the other more Democratic states along the way. That's why we'll be watching on election night North Carolina. It's a Republican state. Polls close early. We'll start to get vote count. It's a fast counting state.
And there's a weak Democratic candidate for governor.
There's a weak terrible Republican
candidate. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
The Republicans would love it if he's weak. Unfortunately, he's very strong. He is pungent. They have a pungent candidate.
Is that true?
Yeah.
The North Carolina governor's race is
over. Debacle. Well, whether it's over, I have not. There isn't enough survey data for me to make a guess from here. But he is very reminiscent of Doug Mastriano who was the gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, who was part of why John Fetterman won, one of the many contributing factors to how the Republicans lost that Senate race.
So that'll be an early test.
So that's an early test, and he is wild and has said, and the thing is, when Democrats started, and I hate this term, but I'll use it, surfacing things that this fellow had said about, very sensitive subjects. And I thought, well, this is old. This is from some sermon he gave in nope, they're 2 years old. They're 18 months old. So North Carolina will be our first warning sign for Republicans. If North Carolina is even tied, it's going to be an unpleasant night for Republicans, because North Carolina is more Republican than Georgia, which is more Republican than Arizona, which is more Republican than Wisconsin, which is more Republican than Pennsylvania, which is more Republican than Nevada, which is more Republican than Michigan. Okay. And you can follow the tail of the snake through.
So what I was leading up to saying is, what if the analysis after the election is that Kamala Harris wins,
right,
because Republicans didn't come home.
Right. And how we think we did something is even more important than how we actually did it. Yeah. Joe Biden, there was a clear mandate from the voting public in 2020. They gave the Republicans the House, or they gave the Republicans 5 seats in the House. The Senate was headed for narrow Republican majority, and Biden had won, but in a much closer race than had been expected. The clear message to the president-elect was, you've fulfilled the thing we wanted you to do, which is you're not Donald Trump. Now proceed carefully. But because of an accident of history, Georgia had 2 Senate runoffs at the same time, and Donald Trump went down there and broke up all the crockery. He flipped over all the tables and yelled at everybody and did all the stuff. And Georgia voters reasonably concluded that they would not like to spend any more time with this party right now. Thank you very much. And the Democrats got those 2 seats out of Georgia, which they should never have had, under normal circumstances, would never have had. That gave Biden a Senate majority, Democratic Senate majority. The received wisdom in Washington, D.C. among Democrats, very wrongly, was that young progressives were carrying the torch and moving it forward, when in fact the very voters that you're describing, I call them, you've heard me, we've had this conversation a million times, I call them Biden-Youngkin voters. These are people who are conservative attitudinally. They care about security, they care about fiscal restraint,
less regulation, lower taxes.
They're moderate. They're right of center, moderate kind of folks who very happily voted for Glenn Youngkin in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. But they voted for Joe Biden because he wasn't Donald Trump, and people reasonably concluded that Donald Trump was too erratic, too wild, too much to have as president. Those were the voters that made Joe Biden president, and they did it for them in Maricopa County, Arizona, and they did it in the WOW counties around Milwaukee, did it on both sides of the Philadelphia suburbs.
And I'm speculating that those voters might make Vice President Harris the next president.
I think if I were betting today, I'd say she's the favorite, and I'd say it's 3-2. I'd say it's narrow, but you have to give her the advantage at this point for a lot of reasons.
And she should keep focusing on them.
And here's this is what's amazing.
And he should too.
This is
I mean that's what I don't get.
The graveyards are littered with podcasts devoted to what Donald Trump ought to do. Right. There's a whole industry in the world of punditry about what Donald Trump ought to do. But Donald Trump doesn't do what he ought to do. And you asked a question about Laura Loomer and Tulsi Gabbard.
I didn't ask about Tulsi Gabbard. I think she's a different category. Laura Loomer
that's
and
for
the
sure.
Holocaust denier that's one whole category that I don't get.
The J.D. Vance touring with Tucker Carlson, talking about eating dogs and cats and doing all of this stuff. We have shockingly weak parties. These 2 parties are shockingly weak.
I see.
They are perniciously, dangerously weak. because of McCain-Feingold, which was the single worst piece of legislation that I have observed in my adult life, and the subsequent rightly decided but very consequential Citizens United decision. The parties have been gutted, and there just isn't much of the national political parties anymore, except for they throw a convention every 4 years. But being the chairperson of the Democratic or Republican Party, as you will recall, once upon a time was a big job. It was a big deal.
Okay.
And now it's not, because the parties don't do that much, relatively speaking, anymore. Into the vacuum, super PACs, and
Are you saying so they go right around these people?
We hear a lot about the distorting effects of what happens when super PACs are driving elections. And in this cycle, Trump has outsourced his GOTV efforts to super PACs. You do it. You do it. And I don't know whether they do a good job or a poor job, but it's a big risk to say, you folks are going to go do this. The other part of the work that has been done, that has been taken over for the party, is messaging and message discipline. And a lot of that has been outsourced to the media. And we can think, just for any Republican listener to think about it the other way, the catastrophe of defund the police and how that happened. And that was a media-created sensation on the left. The infamous New York Times headline, when we say defund the police, we mean, yes, defund the police. Mainline, normal, mainstream Democrats were not talking about defunding the police. That wasn't a thing that normal Democrats were talking about. But a very online, very clickbait chasing.
I would say that, and some progressive leaders of the Democratic Party who play an outsized role in their party. I'm with Rui Teixeira on this.
For sure.
They had an influence on,
and they bought
into that silliness.
That's my point.
Yes,
is that the messaging and message discipline component. So they're chasing media attention. And what's media attention chasing? Your clicks, your traffic. Yeah. So what's the problem? J.D. Vance would not be a United States Senator without Tucker Carlson. 100%. He would never have won the Ohio Senate primary, but for Tucker Carlson wading into Ohio and saying, among these people who are all trying to convince you that they're absolutely crazy. I know you don't think J.D. Vance is absolutely crazy because he wrote that nice book and he went to these good schools and he's been very successful. But I've talked to him and I believe him. He is crazier than all of the rest of the people. He is not pretending. I believe him. And it was enough to get him through a crowded field. Tucker Carlson had more to do with J.D. Vance winning that primary than Donald Trump did.
Really?
Absolutely. So now, when Tucker Carlson says,
come on the road with me,
and people say to J.D. Vance, what do you think about your boy Tucker Carlson having this guy who says that Winston Churchill, not Adolf Hitler, is the prime malefactor
in World War II?
And J.D. Vance says, he's not going to say anything bad about Tucker Carlson. He cannot afford to say anything bad about Tucker Carlson. All a long way of saying, we used to talk about in American politics the problem of siloing in the media as the outlets being beholden to the party. But it's really the other way around. It's really that the party becomes beholden to the outlets and that they become so powerful within the ecosystem. And this is a Jonah Goldberg point, the parliament of pundits. If everybody wants my job and nobody wants to do their job, we got a problem. Everybody wants to be Twitter famous. Everybody wants to have hot takes, but nobody wants to do the hard and often frustrating work of actually governing and actually legislating.
Okay, so there are some people running for Senate in America who would say they do want those tough jobs, and whether they're relying on the media or their party leaders to guide them in their positions.
This is primo transition.
So
this is primo transition right here.
I'm going to transition because I want to ask you. Everybody says that in Montana that the Republican candidate is going to win and the tester is going to lose. Let's put that off on the side. Where is the next best chance for a Republican, not counting West Virginia, to win in the Senate in your mind? Where's the one that you think could happen for Republicans to even have a bigger margin in the Senate?
My contrarianism here is not arbitrary, I promise. So we know West Virginia is gone. And if West Virginia goes and the Democrats don't pick up any seats anywhere, then we're at a 50-50 tie. If Kamala Harris wins the presidency, Tim Walz becomes vice president. If all the Democrats lost was West Virginia, Tim Walz is there to cast a tie-breaking vote. So Republicans just need one more. Now, Montana is the conventional wisdom. Yes, yes, yes. I think Ohio is more vulnerable for Democrat. I think Sherrod Brown is more vulnerable in Ohio than John Tester is in Montana. I think if I were picking right now, I'd say they both probably lose. But I would say that Brown is in more danger, and here is why. Montana is weird. Montana is awesomely weird. Everybody is moving to Montana because they want to get in on the awesome weirdness
I was
of it.
just there. It's booming. Western Montana is crowded.
Yeah.
People are coming. There's traffic. It's fascinating.
Good luck finding a cheeseburger for less than $20 in Whitefish.
Or a house.
It's
possible.
And John Tester is a tough, cagey, and he is gated correctly for where the state is now. Sherrod Brown is gated correctly to where Ohio was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. He's a very Bush-era kind of guy. He and Rob Portman were actually matched up well with each other. The Ohio is going to be very red.
Trump's going to win big.
Trump's going to win by 11, 12 points in Ohio. The Democrats aren't contesting it. They're going to run it up. The vice presidential candidate is from that state. All signs point to Republicans really ringing the bell in Ohio. Bernie Moreno, who is the candidate there, is not an ideal candidate, right? But he's also pretty disciplined, and he can act like a generic Republican. What you want to do in a year like this, in a quadrennial election. So the quadrennial electorate is a third larger than the midterm electorate. Who are the people that come in? Those are quadrennial only, lower propensity voters. What are they voting on? They're voting on partisanship. That's what they do. They come out to vote because their son drove them from the nursing home to go vote. They're voting because it's their duty. They're voting for president. When they go, the partisanship, a good rule of thumb is, and Democrats have been excited talking about Texas and Florida, but I look at these polls down there and it's like, oh, it's only Rick Scott's only up by 1 point. Ted Cruz is only up by 4 points. Well, there's 8 or 9 points undecided. Who are those voters? Do you think that that's a bunch of Democrats in those states who have said, I can't decide whether I want to vote for Colin Allred or the woman, I apologize to the former, Debbie Muscarsell Powell.
She has a complicated name.
She has a complicated name, and I always am afraid I'm going to mispronounce it. But those 8 or 9 points are going to break 70% Republican, right? They're going to come in and push the Republicans over because those are lower propensity voters.
Same thing in Ohio.
In Ohio. Now, in Montana, the Republicans have a better candidate in Tim Sheehy than they were liable to have with Matt Rosendale. So they have a better candidate in Tim Sheehy in Montana than they were going to have in Matt Rosendale. But Tim Sheehy is not going to be able to run as a generic Republican. He is running on the fact that he's a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, and he's got a complicated story, and there's some stolen valor allegations, and he's got some stuff, right? Bernie Moreno is making like a hole in the water, right? He's putting on a blue suit, and he is going out there and trying to be I interviewed him not too long ago, and he was, and the funny one was, it was very much like talking to Carrie Lake. I during my interview of Carrie Lake, I wanted to say, will you put the real Carrie Lake on, please? Who is this? Because she was talking points, disciplined. I couldn't get her to take the bait on stolen election or any of the stuff that had been defining in her career. She wants to win. She's acting disciplined. Bernie Moreno is acting the same way. Tim Sheehy in Montana is about to experience what it's like when $5-6 million gets poured on his head, telling Montanans that he's a liar and he's a person of dubious character.
So are you going to go in with Carrie Lake is more likely to win than?
No.
Okay,
no.
I just want to be clear about that.
No. That's not what I'm saying.
But what about Larry Hogan?
So Larry Hogan, of all the people who were hit by Biden's departure from the race, Larry Hogan is hardest hit because a low turnout election is one in Maryland that Larry Hogan, I wouldn't have favored him to win, but I'd say this is pretty close to a toss-up. Larry Hogan's extraordinary success in Maryland is that as a guy who was transparent about who he was, and they're running ads right now hitting him on being transparent about who he was. He said what he thought about stuff, and that's who he is. And this is a guy who carried approval ratings in the 60s. The Democrats loved the guy, and his numbers remained high. In a low turnout election in Maryland, you got a shot if you're Larry Hogan, especially when you have depressed turnout with young voters and non-white voters, which is what Joe Biden was setting up. Now Kamala Harris is, if you were to design what's the ideal candidate for the state of Maryland, it's Kamala Harris, right? Mixed ancestry, woman, proud progressive past, but a commonsensical, hard-nosed former prosecutor lady. This Prince George's County says yes. They say that. Angela Alsobrooks, who is the nominee in Maryland, would like to be like Kamala Harris, right? She would like to be a political figure like Kamala Harris. And I think when we talk about that quadrennial slew of votes that comes in, I'm afraid that for Larry Hogan, they're going to be 90% Democratic. And they're going to come in. And I rule nothing out, but I would say Larry Hogan's chances to win in Maryland are not as good as Colin Allred's chances to win in Texas, and Colin Allred's chances to win in Texas aren't that good.
Okay, last question, and that is, what is it about the election or the run-up to the election that you know, that you watch for, that you don't think anybody else is? What is there one more thing? You've given us some good tips and interesting insights, but is there? I always want to talk to you. Is there something that you think is not, people aren't paying attention to, that's going to be significant?
I have been contacted by a half a dozen or more outlets who want to do stories about the horrors of election week this year. I'm a kind of an expert on the horrors of election week.
Yes.
And I did one interview with the New York Times about it because it's a reporter whose work I trust, but mostly declined. Because the narrative that's being pushed out there is we're headed for catastrophe, right? The streets will burn. January 6th was only a precursor to what comes next.
Yeah.
Here's what people ought to remember. We seldom make the same mistakes twice. We always find new, more interesting mistakes to make. We're always changing it up with the mistakes. And I would just assure everybody that in every single county election office, in every Secretary of State's office around this great nation of ours, people have spent 4 years, and at every decision desk, at every network, and everywhere, people have spent 4 years thinking about the mistakes of 2020. And there were many. There were many mistakes of 2020. The chief malefactor on that list for me, always, Pennsylvania, which wouldn't count its votes. Pennsylvania, which the Republicans in the state legislature wouldn't let them count the early and absentee votes. We would have been done with election week in 2020 on Wednesday if Pennsylvania had pre-counted the votes, and they'd have said no, because we knew, adult people knew, there's no way Joe Biden won Arizona but is going to lose Pennsylvania, which is 4 points more Democratic than Arizona. So the thing that people don't know that I think they should know about the election is there is cause for optimism that we will be able to transit this difficult 7 or 8 week period, and that we can come through this without repeating the same mistakes of last time. And that I believe that the Republican Party, and you can play this back for me in December and laugh at me, but there's reason to believe that the people in the Republican Party who went along with Donald Trump in 2020 because they thought, placate him, we'll play this out, are not going to do it again.
All right, but let's just answer that specific question. Is Pennsylvania changed the rules so there'll be pre-counting the absentee ballots?
I don't believe so.
So that hasn't been fixed. Well, you've got me all excited that maybe something really important has been fixed.
The Allegheny County, Philadelphia County, Bucks County, the key counting places, we don't have a COVID ballot surge. One of the things that made 2020 so difficult. So we increased the share of mail-in and absentee ballots by 50%. Now, the trend line for mail-in and absentee has gone up every cycle for the past 40 years, every year, but it went from 40% to 60% between 2016 and 2020. That will retreat this time.
Okay.
And we won't have coronavirus rules about who can be in a room to count and who can do whatever. And I just,
You think the counting will be easier and
I
more
take a
accurate?
lot of encouragement.
There have been some improvements.
I take a lot of encouragement from people like Brian Kemp in Georgia, a lot of encouragement from the folks in Arizona. They know what's ahead. They know what's coming. They're not undertaking this saying, well, no one will be upset with what we do.
Right. It sort of reminds me of in the run-up to the Democratic National Convention when
Yes.
everybody was saying it's in Chicago, it's going to be like 1968, the pro-Palestinian protests are going to cause a disturbance, and let's get ready for this. And I said, that's not going to happen.
One of the ways that
Did it happen? It did not happen.
It did not happen. And one of the ways that things get better, we at AEI are always here talking about, okay, well, what's the solution? What's the proposal? What's the policy?
What's the answer?
What's the answer to the question? And you have all of these very smart people here who are working on answers to all of these questions all the time. Talking about it is part of the answer, though, right? What do you do about a problem like election insecurity? Well, part of the answer is we've spent 4 years talking about election security. What do you do about protests at the Chicago Convention? No Democrat walked into the Chicago Convention saying, no danger here. Nothing can go wrong here. They were terrified of it, and it didn't happen because they were thinking about it. So awareness and talking about things is not sufficient, but it is part of how you bend the trajectory of these lines.
Okay, so then you'll be covering election night.
Oh, buddy.
You're at News Nation.
Be at News Nation.
And you will have a decision desk.
We will have a decision desk,
and
we will be first,
will you
and we'll be awesome.
You're going to be. Wait! You just said something.
What?
You'll be first to call the race.
No, I hope we have done something.
But you believe in the competition of being first.
Yes.
Of the idea that a journalist institution should evaluate and beat them.
Beat them.
Yes.
I love. There's a story when I wrote a piece about this for the LA Times one time. In New York State, your people, when in the era just before reliable telegraphy, to get results of elections, you had to be in Albany, and the fastest way to get from Albany to New York City was steamboat, and the pilots plied that river back and forth. And my favorite is that one time, one of the many newspapers in New York, so this is the 1840s.
Yeah, there's probably 30 newspapers in New York.
Right. One of the many newspapers rented a steamship and fitted out one of the staterooms with a printing press, so that when they arrived at the docks,
the papers were already published.
They had already printed papers that they could start handing out while their competitors were running off of the boat to try to get into the newsroom to try to get the papers printed. I like that.
Yeah.
That's the kind of newsman that I want to be. And we have at News Nation, we have contracted with Decision Desk HQ that was the model breaker for a lot of this stuff. And they've been around since the 2012 election, really. And in 2020, they were the first major forecasting outfit to call the presidency for Joe Biden. I'm being facetious. Let my words reach every eardrum. I was not saying we'll definitely be first, but I am saying that we care about being first.
Okay.
And Decision Desk HQ, we're going to report on their calls. So it's going to be very frustrating for me because instead of making calls, I will be analyzing calls that are being made by DDHQ.
Okay.
And you'll see my cheek pressed up against the glass. But we have this beautiful new multi-million-dollar studio in Washington, D.C., and we're going to show it off.
And I know you're going to be mad at me for asking this, but one of your competitors and someone you know well, are they still going to call races?
The relative competitive advantage of being aggressive in race calling, if we to the point about siloed media.
I know you're going to go.
No. The point about siloed media is, why would I be in a rush to give you news you don't want to hear, right? if my audience,
make sure we get that line.
if my audience is 90% one party or another, And that party.
Why would it's like
why
a baseball announcer?
Right, turn the steamship around. Right, don't dock here and get these things.
Don't
up.
show the replay of the other team making the great catch.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Now, the premise at News Nation is that the underserved audience, and there's great new data out from the AP National Opinion Research Center about media burnout and news burnout. Mm-hmm. Americans are burned out, man. It's too much, and it feels too slanted. It feels like it's too much. And one of the things I love about having you on my show is there's a whole nation of people out there who would like to be better citizens and would like to participate in a more wholesome way. But every time they dip a toe into the media world, they are attacked by piranhas, right? And I believe that if we say what we're going to do on election night is try to win and be first, because the name of the game is who can project the outcome first. And we're going to not tell you what you want to hear, but we're going to tell you what you need to know.
Right.
That can work. For the other networks, I don't know what they'll do, but I know that there is, in a siloed media landscape, a substantial market disadvantage to being the first person to bring bad news to your audience.
Okay, with that, we will stop and see you next time. Thank you.